The morning sun spilled over the treetops, catching the mist that still clung to the grass like a stubborn secret. Birds chirped high in the pines, and the soft crunch of boots on gravel echoed faintly across the property. Jacob Holt paused at the edge of his land, steaming mug in hand, and took it all in. 23 acres of rolling hills, dense woods, and silence. The kind of silence money couldn't buy, only earned. This land wasn't just where he lived, it was who he'd become. Off-grid, off-radar, and off-limits, or at least it used to be. He noticed them first 3 weeks ago. Clipboards, khakis, and smug expressions, people who'd never stepped in mud trying to tell a man how to walk on his own land. They called themselves the Greystone Valley Homeowners Association, a freshly minted HOA for the unified vision of the area. But Jacob hadn't signed anything. His land predated their development by nearly 2 decades. Still, they kept showing up, first with newsletters, then with compliance notices, in manila envelopes taped to his fence like eviction warnings. They said they were there to preserve the aesthetic value of the valley. Jacob saw it differently. "You can't preserve what you never helped build," he muttered, sipping his coffee. Behind him the wind rustled the leaves of the old oak near the barn, a subtle reminder that nature listened, even when people didn't. At the last HOA meeting, one he hadn't been invited to but attended anyway, they spoke in coded tones, pointing at parcels on maps and muttering about access management. He'd caught the way they glanced toward his lot like it was a stain they were desperate to bleach. He'd read those glances better than most. After years as a project planner in conflict zones, Jacob could spot an ambush before it took shape, and this felt like one. Back at his cabin, he walked past the tool shed and laid a hand on the cold steel of the lockbox embedded in the wall. Just in case. He wasn't the type to start trouble. But he'd buried enough fence posts to know when someone was planning to move the line. And someone was definitely moving it. Not with guns, with signatures, permits, deeds with fine print. He looked down the dirt road winding into the forest. The land was quiet. Too quiet. Something was coming. He could feel it. Hey, real quick. If you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. It started subtly, like most bad things do. A bright orange stake planted crookedly in the dirt just 10 feet inside Jacob's property line. Then another, and another. By the end of the week, a fresh line of neon markers zigzagged across the northern edge of his land like scars. His fence, the one he'd personally measured, dug, and anchored 15 years ago, was still standing strong, but now it was on their side of the line. At first Jacob thought it was a mistake. A surveyor gone rogue, or a subcontractor with the wrong plot map. He pulled up the stakes, tossed them in a pile by the barn, and figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, a fresh batch of signs appeared. White with gold trim, all stamped with the Greystone Valley HOA logo and the smug authority it carried. One read, "Private community property. Entry restricted without HOA approval." The sign was zip-tied to his fence post. Jacob felt the heat rise in his chest as he yanked it down and crumpled it in his fist. His land hadn't been part of any HOA agreement, ever. He'd checked, rechecked. He even had the original plats, filed in a safe. Still, they kept pushing. The following morning, he spotted a pair of khaki-clad workers driving metal fence posts into his lower pasture. They worked fast, like they were racing a storm. But it wasn't weather they feared. It was him. He pulled up in his pickup, gravel spitting from the tires, window already down. "Who told you to do this?" he barked. The younger man froze mid-swing. The older one didn't even look up. Directive. From the HOA board. Rezoning to community buffer space, the older man said, tapping a rolled-up paper on his clipboard. This isn't a buffer. This is my damn property. The man finally met his eyes. Not according to the new easement map. Jacob stared at him, unblinking. You and I both know that map's worthless. A pause. Then the older man smiled, not kindly. You can take it up with the board. But I'd advise against making this harder than it needs to be. Things have a way of escalating. Jacob's jaw clenched as the man turned back to his work. In his gut, he felt it. The chill of something calculated. This wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. And they thought they had him boxed in. They didn't realize the real fences weren't the ones in the ground. They were the ones in their minds. Jacob woke to silence. Not the peaceful kind that came with misty mornings and rustling trees. This silence had weight, like the world was holding its breath. Something was off. He stepped onto the porch, coffee forgotten in his hand. Down the slope, where the long dirt road met the tree line, the gate stood shut, but not just shut, chained. A thick iron padlock dangled from the middle, glinting in the morning sun like a dare. A sign had been drilled into the gate with bold black letters. Property closed, by order of the Greystone Valley HOA. Do not enter. His blood ran cold. For a moment Jacob just stared. Processing. Measuring. Then the rage bubbled up like a long dormant spring. He stormed down the hill, boots punching into the dirt, his breath fogging in the crisp morning air. The sign wasn't just arrogant. It was illegal. They think they boxed me in? They have no idea what they've done. Across the road, parked half on the shoulder like they owned the place, stood two HOA board members, Janine Teller and that smug, bow-tie-wearing jerk, Martin LeClaire. They leaned against her Lexus, sipping coffee from matching travel mugs like tourists admiring the view. "Morning, Mr. Holt," Janine chirped, waving her fingers like a parade queen. "Lovely day for compliance." "You've made a mistake," Jacob growled, pointing to the sign. "You have no authority to close this property." Martin raised a laminated document like it was the 10 Commandments. Under Article 12 of the Community Beautification Initiative, the HOA reserves the right to enforce visual harmony within its jurisdiction. "This isn't your jurisdiction," Jacob shot back. "My land was grandfathered before your HOA even had a name." "True," Martin conceded, "but our latest survey redefined the shared zones. That road, for instance, technically it's now a community access path. And locking the only entrance? That's trespassing." Janine smiled almost sweetly. "You're not locked out, Jacob. You're just being encouraged to stay in place until the compliance review is finished. For everyone's safety." Jacob stepped closer, close enough to see the tiny flecks of cream swirling in Janine's coffee. "You think this is going to scare me?" he asked quietly. Martin chuckled. "No. But we think it might finally contain you." They turned and drove off, dust swirling behind them. Jacob didn't move, didn't blink, because what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the gate they'd locked, it wasn't the real way in, and it sure as hell wasn't the only way out. Jacob didn't touch the lock. He didn't yell, didn't make a scene, didn't call the sheriff. Yet. Instead, he turned and walked back up the slope, slow and quiet, his boots crunching the dirt like the tick of a clock winding down. The HOA wanted a reaction. That's how they played, pushing until people snapped, then using that snap as leverage. But Jacob had learned long ago. In war, the first man to lose his temper also loses the fight. He poured himself another cup of coffee and stood by the kitchen window watching the trees sway along the ridge. To anyone else, it looked like he was just a man stuck on a farm. Trapped, but they were wrong. They didn't know who he was. Flashback, 8 years ago, the land was just raw earth and overgrown scrub. Jacob had bought it after retiring early from his firm. the top architecture, and contracting firm in the county. He'd spent 2 years designing every square inch of his homestead, not just the cabin, but the terrain itself. He'd carved the slope to reroute runoff, installed redundant access routes hidden by foliage and fencing, built sheds that looked abandoned but were reinforced with steel and packed with equipment. Even the gate they just locked, the one now adorned with their smug little sign, had been placed intentionally. It was always a decoy. That gate led to the most obvious path, sure, but 30 yards deeper into the woods, behind a curtain of elder trees and a camouflage tarp he hadn't touched in 5 years, was the real access point. A gravel road that twisted through the hills and came out on the far side of the ridge. Unmarked, unseen, and still entirely his. The calm came easily now. He sipped his coffee and allowed himself a small smile. They thought he was contained. They didn't realize he'd designed this land to be a fortress, one that looked simple but ran deep, with hidden intention, and now they'd given him a reason to use it. The moon hung low, half-veiled behind drifting clouds. The air was crisp and heavy with pine and damp earth. Jacob moved like a shadow across the property, quiet, calculated, unseen. He didn't take the main path. Instead, he circled the cabin, pausing briefly to listen for movement. Nothing. The woods were still, save for the distant call of an owl and the whisper of leaves in the wind. Perfect. He ducked beneath the edge of a sloping hill behind the tool shed, fingers brushing along the bark of a hollowed oak. A hidden latch clicked softly, and with a gentle push, the trunk swung open like a door. A narrow tunnel, reinforced with treated lumber and lined with solar lamps, stretched forward, curving gently under the ridge. Jacob grinned to himself. They really thought that rusted cattle gate was my only way in or out. Years ago, when building the property, he'd planned every vulnerability and disguised them. That front gate, the one now bearing the HOA's smug declaration of victory, was a deliberate setup. It had always looked like the main access, complete with a mailbox and gravel trail. But it led nowhere meaningful. A bluff, a turn, and a dead end, just enough to fool surveyors or intruders. But this tunnel, it was his true lifeline. It emerged nearly a half-mile away, concealed behind a curtain of brush off a county utility road. Completely legal, fully mapped, but conveniently forgotten by everyone except him. Emerging from the far end, he crouched low and surveyed the trees. Across the way, the HOA installed Compliance Monitor, a wireless camera mounted on a pole, blinked its red light in silence, facing the fake gate, facing nowhere. Jacob chuckled under his breath. They were watching the wrong door. Back inside the tunnel, he closed the entrance and sealed the latch, vanishing the access point behind bark and moss. Then, like a ghost slipping through walls, he returned to the cabin with not a trace left behind. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop, pulled up archived maps, zoning documents, camera feeds. If they wanted to play hardball, they just handed him the game. They were so busy celebrating what they thought they controlled. They never stopped to wonder what they missed. And Jacob? He was done playing defense. Jacob rose with the sun the next morning, the golden light cutting through the haze like a blade. The fake gate was still locked. The smug little sign still fluttered, in the breeze. Good. Let them think they had the upper hand. He brewed his coffee, strapped on his old trail gear, and disappeared again, through the tunnel. By the time the HOA reps pulled up in their spotless SUVs for their morning inspection, Jacob was already standing on the ridge, just far enough out of sight, drone remote in hand. The drone whirred to life and lifted off like a hawk on the hunt. It circled once, then hovered above the decoy gate. Camera zoomed in on the bold, red letters, "Closed due to HOA violations. Trespassers will be prosecuted." Jacob chuckled as he recorded the footage. Cute. Let's see how that holds up in court. He filmed the fake citation posted on the fence, laminated but unsigned. He zoomed in on the easement line markers they'd installed, none of which matched the actual county records. And then he panned to their SUV, parked half on his land, half on the public easement, wheels grinding up gravel they had no right to touch. They were sloppy, arrogant, confident no one would challenge them. He uploaded the footage to a private folder titled Operation Curtain Drop, and then, in his spare time, between tending his solar panels and chopping firewood, he crafted a digital paper trail. Every violation, every lie. Jacob was no stranger to paperwork. He'd built municipal facilities, negotiated contracts, and been deposed more times than he could count. The HOA didn't know who they were messing with, but they were about to find out. By nightfall, he'd filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board, complete with photos, video, and copies of the land plat showing his ownership and legal right of access. He also scheduled a consultation with his old legal partner, now a district judge, just for a second opinion. And still, he said nothing to the HOA. Let them keep watching that gate. Let them keep thinking he was cut off, helpless, stewing in defeat. Jacob was patient, methodical. And now, he had them under surveillance. The trap wasn't his anymore. It was theirs. And soon, the world was going to see what they really were. The day started like any other. Quiet, wind threading through the trees, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. But something different hung in the air. A charge, like the moments before a storm breaks. Jacob stood at the edge of his property, arms crossed, calm as ever. A line of cars snaked up the road, reporters, neighbors, and 2 county officials, with clipboards in hand. A drone hovered overhead, live streaming the entire thing. He hadn't said much in the invitation, just enough to ignite curiosity. I believe the HOA is hiding something. Come see for yourself. By the time the sun hit its peak, the audience had gathered near the infamous locked gate. Cameras clicked, murmurs rose, and Jacob, wearing a navy flannel and jeans, nothing flashy, stepped forward. "You've all seen this gate," he began, gesturing to the bold red sign. "According to the HOA, my land is sealed off for non-compliance, that I'm trespassing on my own property." Gasps and confused glances followed. "But what if I told you? This gate is a decoy." He didn't wait for the crowd to react. Instead, he walked calmly toward the thick brush to the west, seemingly impenetrable forest, and reached beneath the vines. A mechanical click echoed. A hidden latch. The brush parted like a curtain, revealing a narrow gravel path stretching deep into the woods. "This is my real access road, recorded in the original land surveys. Legal. Hidden, yes, but never illegal." Someone in the crowd let out a low whistle. He pointed to the drone feed on a monitor beside him. The HOA claimed, "I was landlocked, that my property violated beautification codes, that I didn't belong here." They forged citations, moved boundary markers, and locked a gate they had no right to touch. The county officials exchanged a look, one already scribbling furiously. Then Jacob played the video, the drone footage, the signs, the smug HOA members boasting about getting rid of the lone holdout. The quote, "We'll make him leave eventually. Everyone has a price." The air turned heavy with tension. A neighbor, normally silent at meetings, spoke first. "They did the same to my cousin. Said her shed violated codes, fined her until she sold." Another chimed in. "They moved our fence last year. I thought it was legal." The dam broke. Within minutes, neighbors were shouting. Others demanded answers. Reporters hounded the HOA reps standing pale-faced at the edge of the gathering. Jacob said nothing. He didn't need to. By sunset, the county had issued a cease and desist. 2 HOA board members were under investigation for falsifying legal documents. Others resigned on the spot. What started as a quiet protest had erupted into a public reckoning. But Jacob wasn't smiling yet. The gate was still standing, and tomorrow, he planned to tear it down. Live. A month later, the silence was back. But this time, it was earned. The buzzing drama that had once surrounded Jacob's land had evaporated like morning mist. The HOA board was unrecognizable now, most of the original members either removed by vote, facing legal proceedings, or too embarrassed to show their faces in public again. County oversight had been installed, and suddenly all the urgent community upgrades vanished overnight. Jacob stood at the edge of his property again, same spot as the day of reckoning. But now the gate no longer bore threats or cheap padlocks. No angry red notices, no smug patrols, just a simple wooden sign nailed neatly to the side of the gate. Nice try. A quiet smirk played on Jacob's face every time he passed it. He never shouted, never raged. Not once. That wasn't his style. He played the long game, and he'd won by letting the truth speak louder than outrage. People think silence means surrender, he muttered one morning, sipping coffee on his porch. But silence just means I'm thinking. The land was peaceful again. Deer roamed the brush near the hidden access path, unaware that it had once been the key to exposing an entire operation. The gravel road remained discreet, just as he'd designed it, his own quiet rebellion etched into the very earth. A few neighbors came by occasionally just to thank him. Some brought cookies, others brought stories, tales of fines, threats, and pressure they'd endured but never questioned, until Jacob peeled back the curtain. He didn't want applause. He just wanted what was his: freedom, privacy, respect. And he had it now. As he leaned against the railing of his deck, wind rustling the trees, Jacob thought about how close he'd come to losing it all, simply because someone thought they could outmaneuver him with a locked gate and fake authority. He'd let them believe they'd won. That was the brilliance of the decoy. A slow smile crossed his face as he watched the sun dip behind the treetops. "Never let them corner you," he said, quietly to himself, "especially when they don't know where the real walls are." A beat passed. The wind picked up. The gate creaked faintly behind him. And then, silence. The kind of silence that says, "Justice served cold." If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.